Hello. Our story begins on the burning world of Mustafar, where Obi-Wan walked up to Padme's vessel. He could see that one of the droids had taken the senator inside, which relieved him. They would be going to a nearby system called Polis Massa to make sure Padme would be treated and healed through her injuries and apparent pregnancy. Obi-Wan stepped towards the ramp and stopped. 3PO was right behind him and fell motionless once he saw Kenobi stop his movement. Obi-Wan turned around, sensing and believing he knew who Padme was and how she might react. There was a need for Anakin, like he had a need for her. Without each other, it could prove to be deadly for the two of them. Maybe there was something worth saving. He didn't believe it, hence why he left Anakin to burn alive, but there was a slight hope in his heart that he could save him. He turned back to face the direction he came from and spotted a greenish Jedi starfighter on an adjacent landing platform. It was how Skywalker got here. He could use it if he needed to. Obi-Wan had very little hope that Anakin would be redeemable after everything he had done, but this wasn't for himself. Kenobi was going back to Anakin for Padme, knowing how important his safety would be to his friend. Part of him forgot how little Padme saw of Order 66. She had no reason to hold resentment towards Anakin like Obi-Wan could, even though he didn't have such feelings for his former pupil. Master Kenobi turned to C-3PO and told him to take the vessel to the medical facility at Polis Massa and make sure the senator was taken care of. He would try to rectify the situation as best as he could. The protocol droid prepared to move into the ship, but he sensed a bit of sadness or hopelessness from the Jedi before him. He tried to ask Obi-Wan if he was alright, but Kenobi just nodded his head while patting 3PO's shoulder as he walked away. There was nothing that would fix what Obi-Wan had been through in the past few days, so for the time being, they would just need to make the best out of the situation. The protocol droid took the coordinates given and moved inside the ship with R2, so that they could move out to Polis Massa to save their human. As Kenobi left the landing zone, the ship behind him lifted off and vanished into the cloudy skies of the planet. He didn't even turn to wave goodbye. He was lost inside of his mind, thinking about what he could say to his former friend, his former student, and his enemy. As he crossed the fields of soot and avoided spurts of lava erupting from the ground and river, he felt colder. The dark side was unlike anything else in the galaxy, a drug if you will. There was a cold chill that could find you even in the depths of hell itself. Mustafar was as far away from cold as a singular planet could be, but not with the darkness Obi-Wan was feeling. Yet as he approached the hill where the duel ended, he realized that this darkness wasn't Anakin's. And he had felt it before, which was even weirder. The last time he felt this darkness, he was on Mandalore. Obi-Wan closed his eyes and felt the hair on his arms stand up. There was something more than Anakin here. He looked over his shoulder to see nothing, so he continued forward, hoping that it wasn't anything. Obi-Wan felt that the chill was a reminder of the pain he felt after Satine's death. Perhaps that was a sign that Anakin had truly died. Little did he realize that on Mandalore and here on Mustafar, he was feeling the true darkness of the Sith Lord himself. Kenobi walked over the edge of the hill, and his heart sank into his stomach. He didn't not kill Anakin, but he also left him on the banks of a lava river to suffocate alone in his own pain. Suffering was written across his body. Skywalker groaned, crawling up the hill with one remaining limb. Yet the irony is, the limb was one that was just covered in metal, the remaining scar from Dooku. What had he done to his pupil? Obi-Wan stepped towards the edge of the hill and felt dirt slip out from under him as he caught himself and gained Anakin's attention. The boy he trained called out in frustration. He tried to scream, but his vocal cords were shredded. He could barely get a word out. He attempted to curse Obi-Wan for doing this to him, as if Obi-Wan hadn't warned him of what would come. Skywalker's face boiled with anger as fury rose from his soul, but Obi-Wan came in closer. He only had his lightsaber with him, and his non-dominant hand placed itself over top of it, just to make sure Skywalker didn't pull it away from him. Obi-Wan told Anakin that he was here to save him, and instead of that, he felt the air leave his body. Anakin squeezed out a few words, telling his master that he would share in his pain. The Force radiated out of his metallic hand, as Obi-Wan was lifted off his feet in a forced choke. Obi-Wan tried to breathe as his legs dangled in the air. Anakin ripped towards himself, hoping to lob Obi-Wan into the lava river that had burned him nearly to the brink of death. Kenobi slammed onto the ground and caught himself, stuffing his fist into the dirt before his body rolled into the river. He held himself up as he looked to Skywalker. whose exhaustion got the best of him. He started to slip down the hill once more. Dirt continued to fill holes left in his burnt body as he stopped with the aid of his metallic hand. Anakin's use of force against Obi-Wan was all of his remaining rage, all of his strength, and now he was left with nothing to save himself. As Kenobi held himself out of the lava river, he pulled himself to his feet as he started to scale the small embankment to find Anakin falling unconscious. Obi-Wan's hands landed under Anakin's back, and he told him that he would save him. All of Anakin's strength was directed back to his arm, as he reached out the still burning hot metallic hand across his chest to Obi-Wan's neck. There was a firm grip that slipped as Anakin fell unconscious. Obi-Wan wheezed, but didn't react too harshly to the now red mark that covered his neck, some of which being hidden by his beard. Kenobi started to move up the hill when he saw a hooded man. Sidious stood above the Jedi Master and gasped in shock. Lord Vader was in danger, but how could he have been bested by Kenobi, the same Jedi Master who had been so easily defeated by Tyrannus not more than a few days before? Obi-Wan placed Anakin on the ground and made sure he wouldn't slip into the river again, as he grabbed his lightsaber and ignited it. As he did, electricity fled from Sidious's fingers. Obi-Wan blocked the strike, as his feet slipped in the dirt beneath him. Sidious watched the blue light blur his vision until he stopped to see Kenobi still standing. What a surprise. He watched the concerned Jedi looking like a trapped animal. Obi-Wan knew he was completely at a disadvantage, and this also meant that Sidious likely killed Yoda. Kenobi looked around his surroundings as his name was called out by the Sith Lord, the master manipulator of the Clone Wars and the transformation of Anakin into Vader. Palpatine referred to the Jedi as Master Kenobi, and admitted his surprise but also amusement in his success in defeating Skywalker. He had underestimated him. Yet, this wouldn't happen again. Obi-Wan looked up with a hint of anger in his eyes. Everything in his life, all of his pain, related back to this one man. And this could be his chance for no. He couldn't let that be his motivating factor. If he was indeed the last of the Jedi, then his main motive was to survive. Sidious told Kenobi that he would die here. His eyes looked to their student, just like Skywalker. They would both die, expendable as it seemed. Sidious was, of course, seeing an unconscious Skywalker, not the one who was capable of scaling the embankment himself. He saw a Sith apprentice that was too weak to become his new pupil. He wouldn't be worth saving. But that didn't mean that Kenobi wasn't a worthy sacrifice to atone for what he had taken from the Empire. Kenobi told the Chancellor that it was over, and Sidious smirked, waving his hand as two clones rushed over the edge and started to fire down at him. The Coruscant Guardsmen's blaster shots ripped back through the air and smashed right back into them as they fell over lifelessly. Obi-Wan rushed up the side of the hill, slipping on the dirt again as he did. Sidious responded, blasting electricity at him once again, but Obi-Wan regained his footing and defended himself from the strike. Out from the corner of his eye, he could see Anakin start to slip towards the lava. Obi-Wan's hand outstretched from his block as he held the unconscious body of his former student with the Force. Sidious laughed maniacally in the distance as he watched Kenobi struggle to save his student as any true Jedi would. The irony of the Jedi being doomed by Kenobi's decision to save his already dead to the world Sith student. Sidious continued to pour electricity down at Obi-Wan, and the Jedi Master with a building tear in his eye had to release Anakin, watching his unconscious body drop into the river and be consumed by fire. Obi-Wan's hands grasped his saber as he shoved back towards Palpatine, before using the Force to leap up the hill and land. Sidious turned towards Obi-Wan, watching the very clearly exhausted Jedi Master struggle to get to his feet. Anakin had taken his energy from him, and it would be very easy to simply kill him. Sidious ignited his saber and stood idly as Kenobi's saber ignited. He looked from side to side as he slowly backed away from the Sith Lord. Obi-Wan knew that to win this, he would need to outsmart Sidious. But how do you outsmart someone like this? Palpatine had lied to the entire galaxy and came out on top. He fed them lies, and he was now the Emperor with unchecked power. Sidious stepped forward, watching Obi-Wan's movements. If this was truly the last of the Jedi, then he wanted to enjoy every moment of his death. Of course, Sidious wasn't going to risk anything for this victory, but Obi-Wan deserved a very slow and excruciating death so that he could understand what he had cost him. While Sidious was imagining the sweet nectar of victory, Kenobi was looking for his chance to survive this, and he only found one way. He needed to get to Skywalker's starship. Obi-Wan stepped on the balls of his feet as Sidious wondered where Obi-Wan's apparent energy was coming from. The Jedi Master spotted the facilities and bounced towards them, giving Sidious a chance to catch his play. He knew that the best way to spoil this for the Sith Lord was doing what he would least expect, but Sidious wasn't playing that way. He was saving his own energy, after fighting Yoda especially, and waiting for his opportunity to strike with one killing blow. Sidious's confidence was beyond high. He had, at least in his mind, defeated 5 council members in the span of 24 hours. He surely would have no problem adding a 6th to that list. The two of them continued to avoid each other, Sidious shadowing Kenobi like a dark cloud of evil. Their blades didn't exchange, they simply mirrored each other's movements. Sidious threw a couple jabs, but he didn't get extremely close to Obi-Wan, knowing that the Master of Defense was quite capable at defending himself. The Sith Lord and the Jedi Master stayed very apart from one another until they entered the facility. Sidious didn't know this, but the facility was very damaged, and perhaps Obi-Wan's best chance at putting the Sith to rest was by trapping them both inside of here. If Yoda was truly dead, then maybe it was time for both the Jedi and the Sith to end. Kenobi could of course hope that there were others out there, but his priority right now was what he knew for a fact, not the possibility of survivors. As they crossed the platforms, Sidious started to strike. Their weapons clashed with one another as Kenobi, again on defense, stumbled backwards. Sidious was jabbing with more precision and focus than Anakin ever had. Skywalker was only coming into his power, but Sidious was unstoppable. Obi-Wan almost slipped up multiple times on his backpedal. Their sabers firmly clashed as Kenobi was pushed through an open door and into the main facility. He ducked under a strike, falling over himself, but Sidious whiffed, crushing through the computer consoles. Kenobi got to his feet and smashed his blade against Sidious's. The Jedi Master was then lifted off the ground by an annoyed Sidious and flung across the room. Obi-Wan slammed into the ground, hearing a snap as his wrist shattered under his weight. He looked over as Sidious howled across the room, shoving his saber into the ground, missing between Kenobi's legs as he swung forward, but Palpatine blocked and blasted electricity down towards Obi-Wan. He pulled his blade back around and blocked it, before ripping it to the side and slamming the electricity down into an already heavily damaged computer console. The damage done during the duel between Obi-Wan and Anakin was starting to cover the floors of the platform. This was only another addition to it. Obi-Wan dipped to his left, as a gash filled the floor and a thin slice covered Obi-Wan's ribs, as he pulled off the ground to the side. He reeled in pain as Sidious leapt in the air and jabbed down, forcing Kenobi backwards into the panel. He was heaving on air. Sidious swung in, forcing Obi-Wan to sweep his stomach in to avoid being hit, as he slapped his blade down, defending himself. As he prepared to square off again, the facility, one that was slipping into the river below, started to tilt. Obi-Wan and Sidious both lost their footing. As they slipped down the floors, their blades swung for each other as Obi-Wan grabbed a hold of his saber and drove it into the ground to hold himself up. He then used his feet to press himself up higher so he could land on a computer console in the middle of the room. Sidious hissed when he looked up to Kenobi. Obi-Wan cut the side of the console and leapt up to another platform, as the other one he was just on dropped towards Sidious. He laughed, using the Force to catch it, as he felt heat rise up behind him. Palpatine launched the entire console back at Kenobi, who was slammed back against the floor, which was now hovering towards the lava river. He held his head as Sidious leapt up towards him and kicked him over the edge of the console, as Kenobi grabbed a hold of the corner of the command console. He looked up to Sidious, who prided himself, telling the Jedi Master that his death would be his greatest pride. Obi-Wan looked down at the slowly rising lava river which had already broken through the external walls. Sidious continued telling Kenobi that he only wished he could torture him for the rest of his days. Obi-Wan hung with his hand over his head, feeling the rising lava, the heat pouring off of it, Sidious's blade hanging below him, as to not be surprised by Obi-Wan as Maul once was. Kenobi looked around, knowing that this would be the end, and then he, still with his saber in his broken wristed hand, whipped it below him, as it shredded the base of the console, dipping it, forcing Sidious to hold himself up. Obi-Wan used his momentum to push himself backwards, across the room to the other computer console, as Sidious shot electricity at him, burning him severely and gluing him to the side of the wall. But as the light of death seemed to embrace Obi-Wan, it stopped. Kenobi's eyes opened, and he saw Sidious's hand rising out of the lava. A spurt had blown inside of the chamber, catching the Sith Lord and dropping him into the rising river. The last of Kenobi's strength would be pulling himself to the landing platform and leaving. He would eventually arrive at Polis Massa inside of the Emperor's shuttle, without its transponder or tracker, and find that Yoda had actually survived. Obi-Wan felt something he didn't know how to process. It was somewhere between rage and disgust, yet at the end of it, he held deep grief, because his friend Padme had died during childbirth, and he wasn't here for her when she passed. The twins were safe and they were named, but their mother and father were confirmed dead. Obi-Wan left Bail and Yoda alone, so that he could think about how he wished to respond. This was done while medical droids take care of his wounds from Mustafar. He was also very physically exhausted, so his thoughts eventually brought him to a short rest. Eventually, when he did wake up, many of the feelings he had initially remained, yet they were more so processed. He needed time away from Yoda to consider what this really meant, because now he had survived encounters with every single Sith of this era. He felt like Yoda had done so little to rectify the rising darkness. Obi-Wan had literally fought Dooku, Asajj, Maul, Savage, Vader, and Sidious, yet here was Grandmaster Yoda, meditating like it would do anyone anything good. Obi-Wan, not known for his frustrations or his outbursts, seethed. He didn't care about his own life in regard to the grand scale of things, recognizing his insignificance amongst the stars. Yet he made every sacrifice he could to stop the Sith. He didn't give up because he knew what the stakes were. How he had survived, he didn't know, but he knew that his action on Mustafar at the end was to kill both of them. If he would die, then the Sith would die with him, but not Yoda apparently. He didn't know how the battle between Yoda and Sidious happened or ended, but he didn't want to know. Instead of giving time for Yoda to make preparations for the twins, Obi-Wan expressed that he'd be taking the Queen's starship and her droids and vanishing into the galaxy with the children. As the closest to the family, he would ensure their protection. Everything was a blur from Obi-Wan's perspective. Maybe it was the anesthesia Bacta still flowing through his veins or something else, but he felt true contempt for the situation, maybe even for Yoda too. Bail and the Grandmaster were confused, even a little hurt, but this was the path Kenobi chose for himself. Yoda knew that Sidious was dead, but he still decided that the time would come for another generation to rise above his failures. Was this the right decision? He didn't know. Kenobi just needed to be alone for this process. The twins would be tough to maintain alone, but the medical droids from Polis Massa were kind enough to equip him with the necessary tools to protect them and take care of them. Despite this, he would go to Naboo to be with the Naberius and get the twins to their actual family, instead of some step-family no one really liked in Bail Organa. Kenobi was very adamant with the family that he was to be their protector, and if the Empire came for them, then he would take the children far away. Both of the grandparents, as well as the twins' aunt, were very understanding of this. They also gave Obi-Wan home with them inside of their villa. Kenobi would be very grateful for their hospitality. However, his main focus from here on out would be his own meditations, ironically. Instead of spending his days inside the villa, he'd be with the twins until they fell asleep, and then he'd hide himself under a weeping willow-like tree in the square for meditating. The Naberius kept an eye on the political landscape for him, which would yield quite satisfying results. Order 66 wouldn't be repealed because no one knew what it was, but the Empire without Palpatine would not elongate its hunt for the Jedi. They would just look to establishing their own power system and protection. The clones, of course, had Order 66 still programmed, but Imperial military expansion, the likes of Necromancer, and dozens of other Palpatine plans wouldn't see their continuation. Dr. Hemlock would still continue to push Imperial science as far as he could, and that would lead to some interest from Tarkin when he realized the Imperial Senate refused to follow the direction Palpatine would have gone. Kenobi, regardless of these external changes, would remain on Naboo. As far as he knew, he was the last true Jedi, and the hole left in his heart by Padme's and Anakin's deaths were filled by Luke and Leia. They would become the joy and light of his life. His meditations would lead him to a desire to find lost Jedi spread out across the stars, but at the end, he decided that he couldn't do that. He needed to stay on Naboo for himself. He had dedicated his life to an order that was so easily destroyed due to the complacent Grand Master. In hindsight, he was able to clearly see the failures of the modern order, and how they could have been changed and righted, even before he rose to the council or became Anakin's mentor. All of these potential scenarios were just a means to healing, things to analyze and take some blame off his shoulders. For years, this would be Obi-Wan's status quo. He raised Luke and Leia as their adopted father, with of course the help of their grandparents and Sola, Padme's older sister. He taught them the Force and ended up switching his methods of how to instruct them. Obi-Wan would run into Ahsoka during this time, and they would rekindle their friendship, but she never stayed put on Naboo. She was just a frequent visitor. Neither of them ever learned what happened to Yoda, and he was perhaps the saddest outcome of all of this. Obi-Wan's actions on Polis Massa opened Yoda's eyes. Due to the fact that he raised every generation of Jedi for centuries, there were very few to question his methods or authority. It was a wake-up call that maybe he had become too complacent. If Obi-Wan said something, then maybe he was the issue. Yoda was working through his own realizations on Dagobah alone. By this point, Tarkin had started an imperial civil war of sorts, using Dr. Hemlock's experiments as weapons of mass destruction against the Senate that rallied around a more democratic process following Palpatine's death. Though their republic would stand and return, this miniature uprising from Tarkin wouldn't be backed by most imperial officers, because without Palpatine, there was no hierarchy. There was the government they served and his constitution, one reworked after Order 66. There would be no new Jedi Order. However, this did not indicate the end of the Jedi. The true threat to the survivors of the Purge was Grand Inquisitor, but after a showdown with Ahsoka and a couple of her Jedi Knight friends, she was able to kill him. He had killed 1 or 2 Jedi in the years since the fall of the Republic, but it never amounted to anything Vader would have been able to accomplish. His death would signify the end of the Sith. While Maul remained a threat in the Outer Rim, his presence wouldn't ever make a mark, especially not against the Reborn Republic. Boken Jedi would become the method of survivors for generations to come. Obi-Wan would never dare burden Luke or Leia with trying to recreate an order that he was partially responsible for losing. He would encourage them to take their lessons and go forth into the galaxy to find their own paths. Luke and Leia would remain Jedi in their own rights, with lightsabers and lessons in the Force, but they would pick their own paths, Luke becoming a pilot in the royal hangar at Theed, while his sister followed in her mother's footsteps. Obi-Wan promised them that an order would be reborn, but he refused for them to be burdened by its rebirth. He'd make amends with Yoda and Commander Cody, but he wouldn't either be responsible for the reconstruction of the Jedi Order. That path would become Grogu's eventually. Being raised by Master Keller and Beck led to the youngling finding a keen sense of interest in bringing the Order back from the dead. On his journeys, Grogu would find Obi-Wan, and there would be many lessons, including books and journals recorded by Kenobi for what Grogu should avoid doing as he started working towards the future. The final encounter between Maul and Obi-Wan would never come, and the aging Sith would find his death at the end of a long road of rolling a stone up a hill and never reaching the top. Obi-Wan made the lives of those closest to him better, and that at the end of his painful journey from the Clone Wars was all that mattered to him. The twins were happy. Their eventual families would grow prosperously. His friends were close, tight-knit, and happy, those being Rex, Ahsoka, Cody, and a few others. And as for Obi-Wan, at the end of an era that guaranteed nothing but suffering, it came to a conclusion with more happiness and joy for him than the era that came before it. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Schmoobs, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Alexander Reese the Beginning and End, Django Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Gallivant Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Grandad Debane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark McDory, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewoo670, Annika Snake Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Saints of Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calig, Youngling Slayer 66, Batman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Photos Like the Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. The big chunk of this has to be Obi-Wan versus Sidious, because, truthfully speaking, Obi-Wan is losing that like 9 times out of 10, if not like 9.9 times out of 10. Star Wars is really dictated by the Force, like the Force kind of dictates how duels go, and I really almost killed both of them. Like, I was like right about to do it, and I was like, maybe I shouldn't. And this was really like a flip of the coin kind of thing for me. Personally, it was like, it really could have gone both ways, and I wanted that to be felt, and that's how I felt writing it. The entire process of being Palpatine in this scenario is simply outsmarting him. Now, I am going to say, in all fairness, Sidious did just fight Yoda, so they're going to both be a little tired. Obi-Wan definitely a lot more tired, and I think that plays a crucial part in this. I think he's going to lose across the battlefield. I think he's going to be on the defense the entire time, and he's basically running. The only way Palpatine really dies is his arrogance, and that's like his one thing. That's like the one thing that always gets him. He's always just a little too arrogant, and that's what gets him. And that's what gets him here. And he has every reason to be arrogant at this point. Obi-Wan got thrown by Dooku, and then what? What's Palpatine going to do? He wants to relish in this. He wants to enjoy it like he did with Savage and Maul. And Obi-Wan doesn't put up a fight where he has to be like, oh, actually? So, unlike the Savage and Maul fight, Palpatine isn't really feeling challenged until the very end. So Palpatine's real sense of challenge here doesn't actually arise like it did for Maul and Savage, where he's like, oh, really, you want that? And then he goes, like, crazy. Because he's toying with Kenobi this entire fight. He just gets a little too arrogant at the end. But hope you all enjoyed. Fun little story here. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.